Hello and welcome, friends. I hope everybody's having a great day so far. If you are new here, welcome. And if you're back, welcome back. I greatly appreciate all of the ongoing support. This is my channel, Dragon's Jewel Creative Gems, and I'm Tegan. And I'm just going to get all those wonderful YouTubey stuff out of the way. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please consider doing so. It's just down below. And if you like the content, please make sure you're hitting the like button on the videos. And of course, if you want to share some love down in the comments below, it's always greatly appreciated. And I absolutely love reading them. I do my best to make sure that I respond back and share some love in your direction as well, because naturally without you, this channel wouldn't exist. And I appreciate each and every one of you. And I thought I would bring some of those Halloween spooky vibes to the channel. There are going to be in the WIP and Chat style format, but I'm going to read some ghost stories of Alberta, which is the province that I reside in. So I will have a spooky canvas that I'll be working on, and then I'm going to read a couple of ghost stories so that you can listen along while you dab and paint, or work on another craft, or what you normally do during WIP and Chats kind of thing, and I keep you company with some spooky tales from my province. So I figured that would be fun. Rugged Sam stays with his house. The Sam Livingston house in Calgary's Heritage Park was a very busy place when it was new. Sam, his wife, Jane, and their 14 children shared it with the local school teacher and his wife, as well as many travelers who were in the needed temporary accommodation. Sam was a colorful character around whom many tales have been woven. Heritage Park entrepreneur Rita Anderson recounts a legend that speaks volumes for the late Livingston's personality. He was out on the trap lines with his dog, and his return home was delayed by a severe storm. Sam had run out of food some days before, and he knew that if he didn't get something to eat, he would die while he waited out the storm. What did he do? He cut off his dog's tail. He made soup for himself and gave the bones to the dog. That's as pragmatic as a person can be. It certainly fits his character that he would be back to his old homestead periodically to make sure everything was being handled to his liking. Retta explained further, one day in August 1990, a lady came through to see the house. We weren't busy. It was the middle of the week and late in the season. I was showing the visitor around upstairs when both of us realized we weren't alone. We could feel the presence of another human being. We mentioned to each other and agreed it was an adult male. He accompanied us down the stairs and stood with us for a while as we were talking by the door. Then, as quickly as he had joined us, he left. Not very polite, was he? She added rhetorically. Retta reported that neither she nor the visitor were frightened by this sensation, although she's often thought of the incident since and wondered whether or not the presence was in fact Sam. Settler loves his land. 1912 was a dynamic year in the new province of Alberta. Schools were opening, roadways were being constructed, the legislature building was completed, and immigrants were arriving by the hundreds to settle the vast land. The Houghtons were among those settlers. They homesteaded on a land 10 miles southeast of Westlock. Husband and wife worked together to clear the land and build a small house. Not too many years later, they were blessed with 2 sons, in addition to the son who'd been born before they left the old country. Fearing their sons would go uneducated if they remained so isolated, the Houghtons moved their family to another homestead, this one only a mile from the school. The move was difficult because the father especially loved the land they'd first come to. He had moved away only for his sons' futures. His determination to return to his beloved homestead and build a larger home never wavered. Unfortunately, he was never to realize his dream. Butch Houghton died 10 years after his boys started school. The original little house was moved to the new homestead so the grandmother could be near her widowed daughter. Years later, the middle son took over the old homestead and turned it into a prosperous farm. Despite the fact he never married, the son eventually tore down the original house and built a much larger one. He lives on in the home to this day. Because of his age, the independent man is not able to get around as well as he once did, so he has had the second story of his old home sealed off. There is no way to reach the top floor from the inside of the house. The only possible way anyone could gain access to the upper story is by propping an extension ladder against an outside wall and climbing in a window. Certainly not a feat a frail gentleman in his 80s would attempt. Oddly, since the sealing off was completed, the place has become somewhat of a neighborhood curiosity. Orange, green, and red lights are frequently reported glowing and moving in the second-story windows. Historic bed and breakfast has unusual guest. Laureen Ferrier of Torchou has resurrected a unique piece of Alberta history, single-handedly. Without her dogged determination, a distinctive segment of the province's past would have been lost. The story of St. Anne's Ranch also happily includes some ghostly sightings. Laureen and her husband, Louise, owned a ranch. It was their home while they were raising their family of 6 children, and it has stayed their home. Laureen now operates a quaint tea room and a bed and breakfast business out of the original ranch headquarters. The building dates back to 1904 when Armand Torchou and his partners Joseph de Vilder and Leon Eckenfelder settled on the land and started what was to become the area's pivotal business. The men were French aristocrats and officers in the cavalry. Deeply religious, Torchou named the ranch St. Anne's in honor of the patron saint of Torchou's birthplace, Brittany, France. That homage is still evident in the carved statue of St. Anne that looks out from above the doorway to the tea room. By coincidence, St. Anne is also Laureen's patron saint. She explained, when I joined the church, the priest suggested that as my middle name is Anne, St. Anne would be my patron saint. In the early days of the century, the ranch prospered, and other adventurers from France joined the industrious pioneers. One of those was Philomene Boutroux, Joseph de Vilder's sister. She and her husband, 5 children, a cook, a governess, a maid, and 32 pieces of luggage had accompanied Boutroux when she immigrated. That must have made quite the convoy as they arrived at the homestead. Not long after that, de Vilder left Canada and returned to France. His sister Philomene stayed behind to continue running the store that had been established at the ranch. After the death of her first husband, Philomene married Papillard, another of the cavalry men. Together they remodeled and enlarged the ranch house. Today it looks much as it did in Philomene Boutrell's time. She must have been quite a woman, Laureen Ferrier said, with obvious admiration for her home's previous owner. Not many years later, all but 2 of the French families left the area they'd made their home. World War I had broken out, and as these men were members of the cavalry and staunch patriots, they immediately headed back to France to help defend their native land. Of the original settlers, only descendants of the Ferriers and the de Beaudraps remain in the Torchou area. My
Husband's grandma and grandpa never spoke much about the past, Lorraine explained. Even if people came out here to interview her about the significance of the ranch, Grandma didn't say too much. She just took the story of the ranch and the town's settlement in her stride. It was their life, so I guess they didn't think of it as being very exciting. Lorraine and Louis had been living at the ranch and raising their children there when Lorraine was approached by the committee doing the local history book. They thought that as I lived on the land where it all began, I might want to research the history of the coulee. I was quite busy with family life, but I did spend as much time as I could in museums and archives. I'd never done anything like that before, and I just loved it. Considering the original nature of the investigations, it's apparent Lorraine Ferry was a natural researcher. However, family demands at the time were such that she wasn't able to pursue the investigation past what was needed for the local history project. When my children were grown and as I was faced with empty nest syndrome, I remember how much I enjoyed all those hours spent digging into the history of our home. She brought the box of research material down from the attic, where it had been stored for several years, and started again in earnest. It wasn't long before Lorraine realized that they were living in a piece of history. In 1989, the St. Anne Ranch was designated a provincial historic site. And that year, in July, Lorraine Ferry opened part of the 30-room building as a seasonal tea room and a year-round bed and breakfast. This seems a very ambitious undertaking for someone who's never had any experience in the hospitality industry. Although Lorraine exudes a quiet confidence, this project was potentially strewn with pitfalls. Amazingly, there was never a problem. Everything went so smoothly when we were working towards the opening. It seemed that whatever I'd need next would be there for the taking. If I decided on a particular fabric to decorate with, I'd find it, and it would be on sale. If I needed an extension cord to continue working, I'd walk just around the corner and find one just the length I needed. It was amazing. It was during this time that Lorraine found a prayer book to St. Anne in the attic of the ranch. She began doing a daily devotion centered around passages in the sacred book. As St. Anne is both her personal patron saint and that of her beloved home, she wondered if all her good fortune wasn't divinely inspired. Not surprisingly, the devout lady has kept up this tradition. Perhaps this is why, when listening to Lorraine talk about the labor of love and its historical significance, you can hear the respect she has for those God-fearing French settlers. The impression she gives is that of a guardian of a sacred trust. As a result, the atmosphere is so warm and inviting that even guests who are traveling on business report that they are immediately relaxed. All of this makes a strange and contradictory background for a ghost story, but perhaps that is fitting too. St. Anne's Ranch is not ordinary, either from a historical or present-day perspective. In the 21 years the Ferries called the building home, no member of the family has ever reported any unusual sightings, noises, or occurrences. Considering the colorful background, this is surprising but true. The night before the bed and breakfast opened to receive guests, the town of Tortue was hit by a tremendous hailstorm. Roofers arrived from out of town to repair the damage that had been done to the houses in town, Lorraine remembered. The morning after they arrived, one of the men was quite upset. He asked me if the place was haunted. Lorraine assured the man that she'd lived there a number of years, and to her knowledge it wasn't haunted. The man's question certainly made her curious, and she inquired as to why he'd ask about such a thing. With little prompting, he told the lady that he'd seen a young woman at the end of his bed. She was trying to say something to him, but he was having a hard time talking. It was clear the tradesman had been badly shaken by what he'd experienced. Despite the 3-night booking the roofers had made, the Furies never saw them again. If they finished their work in town, they stayed somewhere else for the next 2 nights. Nothing unusual occurred for a while, and the incident was largely forgotten in the excitement of the new and growing business. That is, until Lorraine invited 2 friends back to the ranch after a meeting they all attended in town. I asked the ladies if they'd like to look around while I made the tea. One of the women who had asked to be identified by the pseudonym Patty saw or felt more than the other. "I'm not a psychic," Patty began, "but I do seem to be extremely sensitive." As we approached the set of stairs that leads to the top of the house, I had the strangest sensation. I felt there was a girl or a woman, probably someone in her late teens, standing at the top of the stairs wearing a blue calf-length dress. She kept looking out the window towards the southeast. I got the clear impression that she had lived there, but that she was waiting for something or someone. It wasn't a scary feeling at all. She paused before adding an explanation. "I've had these experiences before. The sensation wasn't unpleasant. It was quite livable. I felt the girl was friendly, but lonely." Patty also received the impression that the young woman had recently had a love affair with a man in uniform. Or CMP maybe, I don't know, but I had a clear impression of the 2 of them under the tree together in front of the ranch. Patty was unaware of the Northwest Mounted Police had been stationed at the Patty was unaware that the Northwest Mounted Police had been stationed at the ranch, or that Philomene's governess had married a man named Tucker, who served as a corporal with the forerunner of today's Mounties. Their wedding was held at the ranch house, and Lorraine has preserved some photographs she discovered of the happy occasion. Even though I'd never been in the place before, I knew too that a particular doorway led to a storage room. I strongly associated the storage room with a severely handicapped child. I had the impression of the child being wheeled around from room to room. Her sensations were unnervingly accurate. Louise Ferrier's cousin had lived out her short life at the ranch. Teresa was the child's name, but her nickname was Boo Boo, and she was always called that. Boo Boo was born normal, but had become badly damaged by a misplaced intravenous needle. She was blind and mute. Up to the age of 3, she could stand for short periods of time. Slowly, Boo Boo lost even that ability, and she had spent her days in a crib that was equipped with casters so that she could be pulled from room to room. Despite the extensive brain damage, the child's hearing was obviously keen. She loved music, seemed to recognize people by their voices, and would smile at her mother's voice. The child died peacefully at the age of 15 while living at the ranch. Patty had no knowledge of any of this and was angst to learn that the storage room was where she sensed the child's presence still held the crib that was home to Boo Boo. Discussing it 3 years later, Patty decided it was time for a return visit to St. Anne Ranch. "There's lots there," she stated simply. More recently, a man traveling on business stayed overnight at the ranch. Before turning in for the night, he asked for an early morning wake-up call. He slept deeply all night and was surprised to wake up to an image of a young woman at the foot of his bed. He thought this was extremely unusual wake-up call. By the time he was able to fully clear the sleep from his head, the girl had disappeared. His wake-up call came in a standard form of a ringing telephone not long after. You know, he never said a word to me about the experience, Lorraine said. I heard about it, though, through the grapevine. To date, not one member of the furry family has felt or seen anything unusual about their enormous home. Tales ensure protection. The Alberta Badlands are perhaps the most dramatic stretch of geography in the province. Among the features in the Badlands are hoodoos, which are pillars of rock or clay caused by erosion and often having strange shapes. It's no wonder the Aboriginal people thought the area was very special. Their lore contains many legends. This is one about evil ghosts. It's said that anyone who ventures out around the hoodoos after dark risks being hit by the dangerous arrows of the long dead, who are called the night people. These arrows can cause death, disease, or disfigurement. These night people may or may not strike, so the natives never know whether or not it is safe. To protect themselves, the tribe would perform the ghost dance and offer gifts to the spirits whenever they had to go near the hoodoos after dark. Today, of course, this ritual is no longer maintained, but the interpreters at Dinosaur Park always retell the legend when they talk to visitors about the area and its oddities. Skiers' ghosts. On March 11, 1956, while an avid skier, Charlie Dupree took his last run down Marmot Peak, an avalanche claimed his life. Today, more than 30 years later, Charlie is still very much a presence on the Marmot Basin ski slopes. In 1964, a ski run was named after Charlie, and from that day on, the young Jasper resident has been back on the slopes. According to Art Mulhern, head of security for the resort, the spirit is a playful one who can occasionally carry things a little too far for other employees' liking. A young man making snow at 2 a.m. was surprised to hear the office phone ring. The switchboard was closed, and so the puzzled worker left his post to answer the call. There was no one there. And when he returned to his snowmaking machine, it had been turned around. Charlie has been credited with the prank because it's typical of the ghostly stunts he's pulled over the years. You'd think that if an avid skier in life returned to a ski hill, it would be to take advantage of conditions. Charlie Dupree must have had his fill of the slopes because most of his tricks take place inside buildings. Doors mysteriously open and close, dinnerware will be found spread over a floor, and bottles left standing on a shelf have dropped to the floor but remained in an upright position. The ghost of Charlie Dupree is not a shy one. His pranks have been witnessed by most of the staff at Marmot Basin. Brian Rodd, marketing manager for the resort, was quoted recently in the Edmonton Journal as saying, "Everyone who has worked around the hill knows of Charlie Dupree's ghost. Any security person who has ever worked at the mid-mountain overnight tells stories of strange happenings such as footsteps in the middle of the night. This story and the following one led credence to the theory that even death cannot end a passionate skier's love of the slopes. The 1930s, 4 avid skiers made their way from the United States to the slopes near Lake Louise. They stayed at the Skokie Ski Lodge near the hill, and set out to challenge themselves to the limit. The ski patrols repeatedly warned the group not to venture out on their own. There was a great risk of an avalanche, and without an experienced guide, their safety could be in jeopardy. Since common sense has nothing to do with intelligence, one of the 4 daring skiers was Christopher Paley, a renowned mathematician. Paley and his three friends set out against the best advice of those who knew the area and its dangers. As was foretold, an avalanche occurred in the Partamigan Valley, and the Americans lost their lives. Poet John Porter recounts their plight in his poem, The Legend of the Halfway House, in which he imagines that upon reaching heaven, the 4 declined St. Peter's invitation to enter, assuming heaven's ski slopes inadequate for their skills. Porter has them returning to the Lake Louise area to ski into eternity. Artistic interpretation aside, visitors to the area report seeing lights on and hearing noises coming from an abandoned cabin. The 4 have also been spotted skiing through the trees. It's not hard to tell the ghostly skiers from the live ones. The 4 Americans are said to be skiing on fluorescent skis with vermilion flames trailing them. Perhaps there really is heaven on earth. Phenomenal Castle. Spooky tales of old haunted castles in the British Isle and Europe are legion. The following story is like one of those, but with a couple of dramatic differences. The castle is located in northern Alberta and is only 13 years old. In keeping with the tales from abroad, Alberta's castle is filled with ghosts and unexplained phenomena. Margot Legaze was born and raised in the St. Paul area of the province. As a young woman, she became a teacher and moved east to Montreal to pursue her career. After marrying and having children, Margot decided to return to the area of her hometown. Someone owed our family a great deal of money, Margot explained, while seated at a picnic bench in the main room of her castle. He didn't have any money, but he did have concrete blocks. I decided to accept those instead and set about drawing plans for the building I have here. The year was 1979, and the location Margot chose was completely isolated, roughly 15 kilometers north of St. Paul on a bluff overlooking St. Vincent Lake. It used to be my hideaway. Now I have neighbors, the lady said, indicating other homes within sight of her beloved gray cinder block castle. The first week we were here, I woke up every morning at 3:30 a.m., hearing footsteps walking back and forth across the ceiling. I thought it was my sons, and I would go and knock on their door and tell them to be quiet and go to sleep. Margot explained in her litting English that it is based in Alberta's unique version of French. But the boys were asleep and they got mad at me for waking them up like that every night. They hadn't heard anything at all. After listening to these heavy footsteps for several nights in a row, Margot got up the courage to investigate. I climbed up on the roof, but there was no one there. I was the only one who was hearing this noise. I didn't sleep until daybreak for weeks. Then finally I swore at him, whoever he was, and told him to stop. That did it. After that, it was usually quiet at nights. The staircase to the second floor of the castle is a circular metal one. As you climb up or down it, you make 2 complete 360-degree turns. While her sons and their fellow musicians watched and listened, the staircase shook, one stair at a time, and the heavy footsteps that had routinely been heard on the ceiling proceeded down the stairs. Those boys went bazookas, I tell ya. They went to bed and locked the doors to the bedroom. They didn't stop them hearing partying noises from the next room. That didn't stop them from hearing any party noises from the next room. There was laughing and bells, but there was no one there. It's not likely the Legay's boys were ever inconvenienced by other musicians wanting to use the castle for practice sessions. The circular staircase figured in another sighting, Margot explained. My son was sitting on the Chesterfield, and a woman with blonde hair and wearing a long dress came down the stairs and beckoned to him to come with her. He didn't. Margot's husband has never lived in the castle, and her sons have since moved away. She doesn't teach any more, but sculpts full-time. I'd loved teaching, but I decided to enjoy life, she said quietly. Tim Landru, a young construction worker in the area, lives in the castle with Margot now, and helps her with the upkeep. He, too, has had an experience on the staircase. I was walking up the stairs and something grabbed the back of my knee. It really scared me, and I ran up the rest of the flight. Tim recalled, and then he added, "There's also the thing in the bush." Yes, Margot continued, we have an outdoor privy. Twice when I've been out there, I've heard the sound of a heavy animal, like a moose, running straight at me. It was terrifying. I was sure I was going to be trampled. It happened to others out there too, but there's never anything there. Tim added, no one's heard that for a while now. It seems once you stand up to the fear you feel of this noise, you never hear it again. Whatever it is preys on people who are afraid of it. Why would anyone stay on under such stressful circumstances? Margot answered matter-of-factly, I've thought of leaving. I had a real estate agent come out and take a look at the place. When she walked in it, it started to rain, and you could tell she was very uncomfortable. As she looked out the window, a ball of lightning struck. It hung suspended in the middle of that window for a moment. I told the agent, never mind. I can never leave this place. Since then, whatever spirits are here seem more settled. Still, before I leave to go away anywhere, I say out loud how much I love this place and that I'd never leave it. And I explain that I'll be back. That seems to help. That was in 1980, and Margot has kept her word. In return, the atmosphere in the castle has improved. When my mother was alive, she refused to come here because there were such dreadful smells. Sometimes it smelled like burning flesh. That smell would get into your hair, and it just wouldn't wash out. You couldn't leave a loaf of bread out for more than an hour, or it would pick up this horrible smell too. It was only through Margot's kindness that the castle has finally ridden of the putrid aroma. She offered the castle to a young priest to use as a retreat. After he left, I never smelled that foul odor again. When I saw him next, he didn't speak of it directly, but he did go to great lengths to tell me of previous exorcisms he'd done. Although the putrid smell has not returned, the castle's not entirely rid of mysterious smells. Occasionally, either Margot or Tim will experience whiffs of sweet smells that are extremely localized. You can just be sitting in a chair reading and suddenly out of nowhere smell something very sweet. Or you might be walking from room to room, and in one particular spot there will be a very strong but pleasant smell. Occasionally when I'm baking and I check what's in the oven, I get either a foul or sweet smell that is not what you'd expect from baking. Then the next time I check, it'll just smell like baking. Whatever it is, it likes to be acknowledged. We pay attention to it, and then it goes away. Unfortunately, Margot has discovered this method does not always work. A stain appeared on the floor. It smelled terrible. I scrubbed and scrubbed at it, but it just got worse. Finally, I just left it alone, and eventually it went away. As well, phantom music occasionally pervades the castle. people across the bay had heard organ music coming from here. They said it was lovely. There was no one here that night, and there'd never been an organ in the place. I've heard flute music from nowhere, and once I heard a guitar playing upstairs. It was so real that I ran and got a neighbor. I was sure there was a person up there. The neighbors wouldn't come, though. They were afraid it wasn't a person. Margot chuckled at the memory. One time, Margot's natural curiosity made her leave the entity a note. She told it, "If you're human, eat." The next day, the shade from the little lamp she'd left the note under was broken into tiny, uniform pieces. That apparently was the answer. Over the years, Margot has come to accept that the building is hers and that she's safe there. This safety does not always include the right to a full night's sleep, however. Only a few years ago, she was wakened by a figure of a man standing beside her bed. He was so clear in my mind that I could draw him, the lady explained in her soft voice. He had an open shirt and a mustache. He appeared to me a few times, and then I realized I recognized him. I asked him what he wanted. He told me to go to his mother, who lives in St. Paul, and tell her that he is happy where he is. I didn't want to do that because I knew the woman, and she wasn't very approachable. After a few more visits from the young deceased man, Margot overcame her hesitancy. She knocked on the woman's door, and before the man's mother could say anything, Margot explained her mission. I told her that I must speak, and speak quickly, or else this will not get said. Then I gave her the message from her son, and I went away without another word. The last time the young man appeared to her, he stood at the head of her bed. He smiled down at the woman and then disappeared into a column of smoke. Although there had been no further apparitions at the castle, rooms will mysteriously light up with a creamy white glow. When that happens, there are no shadows, Margot explained. And Tim watched balls of light about the size of softballs bounce all around him while he was working outside. Margot has investigated the history of the land her castle sits on. So far, she really hasn't determined anything significant. Locals say maybe the castle sits on an ancient Indian burial ground. I don't see how that would explain it. Because when I've seen someone, they've been European, not native. I don't know what has caused all this. I do know there is a strong field of energy running through this castle. A physics student found it and demonstrated it to me. If you move your hand in a circle just by the castle door, you'll feel it. Margot Legaze invited me to try the method she'd been told to use to feel a field of energy. I did feel something, but suspected it was only nervousness at being in such an unusual surrounding. Toward the end of the interview, Margot took me up the circular staircase to try the extension of the field on the second floor. There was no mistaking the strange sensation of the palm in my hand that time. It tingled as though it was asleep, but it felt very warm instead of cold feeling that normally accompanies the sensation. Something very out of the ordinary is at work in Margot Legaze's rural Alberta castle. Resort builder stays on. During William Hayhurst's life, he held a variety of positions: teacher, administrator, politician, store owner, and finally a resort builder. Since his death, Hayhurst has settled down and is now content to be the ghost of the Sunwapta Falls bungalows. The resort is located just outside of Jasper and was built by Hayhurst in the early 1940s. Construction was difficult. The war was on, and both material and labor were in short supply. Despite these obstacles, the lodge opened in the summer of 1941 and has been running successfully ever since. Perhaps part of the credit for the success should remain with its originator. Staff at the bungalows take Hayhurst's presence as an accepted fact. They see him regularly and even more frequently feel his presence. Because of this acceptance, they weren't surprised when a couple who'd been driving by on the highway arrived at the bungalows quite distraught. It seems the two had spotted a hitchhiker. They had seen him clearly. He was a white-haired man. The couple explained when they pulled over to let the elderly man into the car, he had vanished. The couple were understandably concerned. The staff, however, weren't surprised at all. The description of the hitchhiker exactly fit that of William Hayhurst. The first years of operation were difficult for Hayhurst and his Sunwapta Falls bungalows. The resort has changed hands several times since, but Hayhurst's presence has been consistent. His spirit has never threatened anyone, and it's believed that he's just overseeing the business he started over 50 years ago. Grandma watches writers. 4 miles from the village of Picardville, northwest of Edmonton, 2 men built a house for their aging mother. The woman had worked hard all her life to make a living for herself and her sons. She had done without over the years, and her sons were determined that, at last, she would have the comfortable home she had dreamed of. By the time she moved into her dream house, the woman was badly crippled with arthritis and was only able to look at her land, which she did with pride. Shortly after the woman died, not wanting to get rid of their mother's possessions, the sons merely moved everything into the attic. One of her sons moved into the house and lived there for the rest of his life. When he died, the old place stood empty until the woman's granddaughter, a writer by profession, decided the house would make an ideal working retreat. After having the abandoned house cleaned and fixed up, the granddaughter began to use it as the isolated hideaway she needed to do her writing. Right from the start, she felt something unusual in the house. But she put the feeling down to the unaccustomed isolation. One weekend, she invited a fellow writer to join her. They spent a pleasant afternoon and evening enjoying one another's company and the quiet of the home. In the evening, they were sitting in the living room discussing writing. The guest looked up and saw the face of an old woman in a doorway. The granddaughter saw the expression on her friend's face and followed her gaze. There was the face of her grandmother. The apparition looked intently at both women, then gave a nod of her head and disappeared. She has never returned. She doesn't have to. Her granddaughter knows now that she is welcome and protected in the once abandoned home in Picardville.